All right, welcome everyone to a new episode of the Roscoe's Wetsuit Neuro podcast. I am your host, Toby Passman. On the show with me today, we have a special guest, Dr. Matt Poepsel. Matt is affectionately known as the Godfather of Talent Optimization and serves as Vice President of Partner Growth at the Predictive Index, provider of the world's leading talent optimization platform. Over a career spanning 20 plus years, he made the shift from insecure business manager to authentic people leader. Now it's his mission to help aspiring leaders at every level do the same. After serving 6 years as a Reconnaissance Marine and Arabic linguist, he took his first civilian job in high tech. He embraced his passion for personal development and earned his PhD in psychology with a focus on technology-assisted coaching. He now counsels executives and teams across the globe in the areas of employee performance and experience. Matt, welcome to the show.
Toby, thanks for having me.
So tell me about talent optimization. Tell me kind of how you define that and why that ended up being the field that you ended up diving into.
Yeah, I'd love to. At the highest level, I would say that talent optimization is about aligning people strategy with business strategy to produce a superior business result. And so if we think about it, oftentimes in organizations, we hold those two things separately. We'll work on the business strategy, we'll think about the technical aspects of the business, but won't give a lot of thought to the people that are actually doing the work. And so what we find is that if we don't take that type of approach, we don't end up with an optimal result. This can show up in the form of missed targets, could be risk to a strategy that we haven't executed yet, or it shows up as a people tax, where people are either having frustration, they're having some sort of miscommunication, they're not making effective decisions. So all of this kind of led to this new discipline called talent optimization. It's kind of a mouthful, but I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is how many of your friends and family that you know of have jobs that they don't love, right? And the reality is, as you know, we know too much about psychology, we know too much about organizations and people at work to really just allow people to have a bad day at work, but it happens all the time. And so when we started to think about why is this happening is because we lack a framework that really connects the business deeply with the people parts of it. And that's where talent optimization jumps in the fold to solve that problem for us.
So connects the business to the people part. So tell me, can you elaborate a little on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you an example. So sometimes we want our organization or a team or whatever it might be to be innovative. We want to be agile. We want to be creative. We want to make something happen. So the reality is that that type of work demands certain types of behaviors from people. And people are naturally wired, some to do those things quite naturally. Some can be coached and developed to do that if it's close, but it's not quite their strongest natural drive. And others might really struggle to do that type of work and really should be advised to kind of contribute in other ways to the organization. But the reality is when we look at candidates, for example, for jobs, we don't really know how to behaviorally interview them for specific roles. Or if we look at a team and we start putting people who are very innovative right next to people who are trying to protect the business from making mistakes or trying to drive high levels of efficiency, we end up with these competing goals and these competing styles, and that produces that type of suboptimal outcome that I described.
So what originally got you interested in was talent optimization like something that you knew you wanted to get into for a while, or how did you end up stumbling into that line of work?
Well, at the risk of going too far back, I'll say that when I was in the service, I was in the Marine Corps and I got stationed on a U.S. Navy ship. And for launching out of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, it takes U.S. warships about 10 days to cross the Atlantic and get over to the Med, which is where we were going to be doing our work. So I had a lot of time on my hands. So I went to the ship's library and I found two books that ultimately changed the course of my life. One was called In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters, and it was all about businesses and what makes businesses really successful. He came out of a McKinsey consultant, and that one was great, and it's kind of nerdy, it's fine. But the second one you might be more interested in, it was a general psychology textbook, straight up Psych 101. And I started reading and I got to the biological basis of behavior and sensation and perception and neurophysiology. And I was just blown away, fascinated. And every chapter I read in that stupid textbook started pulling me further and further into human behavior and started looking at everything from social psychology, developmental psych, and all these things. I was fascinated by this stuff. And so when I started to decide to work on my undergrad work, I decided I wanted to learn all about psychology, which was great. And it really turned out to fit for me as an adult person because I was really into goals and goal achievement and coaching and professional development and all these kinds of things. So as I started to continue down my journey here, I was working at a software company and I was a product manager, which I really enjoyed that work. But what I found is that I didn't have a lot of passion for what the product did. It was basically a really high tech product and it didn't really help people in a direct way. So I said, well, I want to take my nights and weekends and go back to study more psychology. And so I ended up getting my PhD and studying technology assisted coaching. How can we use all this technology in our phones and in our browsers and basically help coach and develop people and organizations to a higher level? And so when that started to become possible and interesting to me, I ended up working at the company I'm at now, which is the Predictive Index. And we have behavioral assessments. We can understand all about how people are wired and how to fit them to job roles and coach and develop them to greatness. But at the time, what we really lacked was that framework, that talent optimization, as it would later be called, that would really help demystify and connect the people parts of an organization to the business parts, like I had shared. And now it's really been a great joy to start to write that up and codify it, develop new software tools, new consultative interventions that really help organizations perform better by helping their people perform better and have better work experiences as a result.
Awesome. So what are some of the biggest sort of psychological components of talent optimization when it comes to ensuring that you get the peak performance out of whether it's managers or employees of a company? What did you gain from studying psychology that you're now able to apply with talent optimization?
Yeah, personality is a big one. When we think about how we show up at work and what drives us, what creates the motivation inside of us, and the natural preferences we have at work, that's a big one, and certainly has a lot of versatility. Some others, and we can come back to that one, but I think some others, just to give us a quick list here, cognitive ability definitely shows up at work. The ability and the rapidity in which we can acquire new knowledge, very, very important. There's other examples that where we actually had to create new science around converting strategy, into people terms. So strategic priorities and objectives. We now have inventories for these things as well that help us map what's the work to be done, as I say, with who's doing that work. And then we can start to identify gaps and areas where we can coach and develop people or make specific hires or work with teams in level down leaders and bench strength to help close off on those gaps. So there's a variety of things in that area. Inside organizations, of course, a lot of other techniques that are commonly used would be something like interviews, behavioral interviews, very, very common, or the way that we write job descriptions or job advertisements. Those are forms of different types of measurements and other types of techniques used to try to bridge the gap between work and people.
And tell me, can you give me like some examples of how, like, in terms of with talent optimization, is it more of a process of kind of identifying people's unique personalities and strengths and then just kind of playing off of that, or is it like modifying, um, I guess how people behave in the workplace?
Yeah, ideally both. The first thing that we want to understand, like a lot of times I always describe, I want to understand what's the work to be done because you can be totally objective about it. And sometimes I say, before we put any chess pieces on the chessboard, let's take a look at the strategy here, for example. Now, at the organizational level or at a large team level, that could be the strategic priorities I talked about earlier. Or it could be a team charter if it's like a cross-functional team or a director level team, or it could be a single job if you have an individual who's going to be pursuing work. But regardless of which level of analysis we're looking at, we definitely want to talk about what's the work to be done. With that understood in the, kind of, let's say, our left hand, then on the right hand, you want to take a look at who's doing that work. Now, ideally, you'll find somebody or a team configuration that is naturally wired to do that thing. So for example, if let's say I need high levels of teamwork and employee engagement, employee experience, I'm going to want to find somebody who's naturally collaborative, who thinks about social structures, who really has that type of social drive within them, both to work with and through other people, but also to create infrastructure inside organizations that allow teams to really form and take hold. Ideally, I'll find somebody who I could, who's naturally wired to do those things. But if I don't, and I have somebody who's close to that, we don't want to pigeonhole people and say you can never be anything but this one thing. With coaching and development, with sufficient motivation, energy, and focus, somebody can stretch a little bit. And I think anybody listening to this podcast has stretched in some way in their career at some point. But the other is that we have to accept that there are limitations. We can't ask somebody to do something that's the polar opposite to how they're wired for really long periods of time. So a great common example of that one is extroversion. I am a naturally extroverted person, so I like to work with and through other people. It energizes me, at least in a work context. So if you put me in a situation where I was in a cubicle all day and I was totally isolated, doing heads down, detail-oriented work exclusively, it would just crush my soul, right? I just couldn't have that. I wouldn't really enjoy that type of work. For somebody else, that's exactly the kind of work that they want to do. You can think about researchers, you can think about computer programmers, whatever it might be, that maybe actually look at things I do every day, which is like interact with other people and be like, that sounds like hell. Please don't make me do that other thing. So I think once we understand the nature of what's the work we need done and use that as a lens to look at who we might have doing that work, then it works out really well. And we've done this for many years when it comes to individuals in job roles, but now being able to do that at the team level, at the entire organizational level, to think about intentional cultures, all of this based on the foundations of behavioral and other types of psychology is what is really the opportunity to unlock the performance of people and, by extension, entire teams and organizations as a result.
Tell me about what were some of the biggest things like from like that you kind of learned or just experienced in the Marines that maybe translated to the current work that you're doing now? Because I assume, I mean, psychology is obviously part of everything, but I would assume there's lots of aspects of psychology that are very important in the Marines. Like, was that some of the early beginnings of this kind of work that you're doing now?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that the Marines are pretty exceptional at what they choose to do. And they have a very specific process that they put young people through in order to convert them and allow them to earn the title of Marine, which is really important. Now, you have to remember, for me, at this point when I enlisted in the Marines, I was coming off of a college experience that, let's just say, it didn't quite go so well. I wasn't really ready for school. So I turned in a 0.7 GPA. Nobody was really too impressed by that. And the school was like, yeah, you don't need to hurry back. You're kind of done here. So when I enlisted in the Marines, I was like, okay, this is kind of my first real job, so to speak. And I went through my enlistment, and now you want to talk about a focus on leadership development and excellence and understanding teamwork and esprit de corps and all these things. What I didn't appreciate at the time is I thought this is how adults operate. This is just how it is. People just invest in, and adults love to talk all about leadership and performance and study and all these kinds of things, not realizing at the time that, if the Marine Corps needs a new colonel to run some unit, they can't just go to another branch of the service or to civilians and say, we need a new leader for this thing. They can't go outside. They have to develop from within. So I didn't appreciate it at the time, how much of an emphasis they put on leadership and development, until I got out and saw the absence of it largely in the civilian world. So that really struck me, of saying we have to be able to do better. We have to be able to have situations where leadership development becomes, a possibility for these young people who didn't have a military sort of background experience. The other thing that the Marine Corps, I would say, they're fantastic at leadership. They suck at vulnerability, right? Or at least historically, when I was in, that was the case. And now what we find is that higher levels, especially with what we've been going through recently, higher levels of vulnerability, an emphasis on self-care, these types of things are super important. Are definitely something that came about after, well after I had separated from military service, but are so needed, for performance and for people's welfare inside organizations today.
So tell me about in terms of the current work that you do, what do you have like a preference as far as what type of like organization or sort of audience that you're catering to? Do you have a preference for like what types of people that you like to work with?
Yeah, I'll answer that broadly from the talent optimization perspective, generally first, then I'll talk about myself specifically. In talent optimization terms, the only reason you need to care about it is if you have employees. So it's obviously a pretty big audience. But the reality is that if you have an organization of any size, trying to understand what helps those people perform at their best and how they can actually be aligned with the work in a way that makes the results and their individual performance and team performance as successful as possible is really, really paramount. And the reality is that if you don't make your people practices a priority, if you don't do the things that you need to do to design winning teams or to hire top talent or inspire people to greatness, then it's going to show up in your financial result. You're just not going to have an optimal organization. So whether you're a movie theater, landscaping company, Fortune 50 automaker, doesn't matter. Your business cannot be optimal if you don't get the people part right. So there's really no preference. And actually, one of my favorite things about my job is being able to work with organizations of every size, every type, 140 countries around the world, just everyone trying to figure out how do we help it within our context. Context is a hugely important word. Within our context, how can we optimize the business result by optimizing the experience and the performance of our people? So that one is very wide open. For me personally, the opportunity to work with really smart people, to work with people who think and move very quickly, who have a bias for action, who are principled and purpose driven around making the world a better place through whatever means that we're trying to bring to bear, and who aren't jackasses. That's really important to me. I want to enjoy the work that I do, and I want to be able to really enjoy the company of the people in which we're going to do it, because we're going to work hard, we're going to spend a lot of time together, so we want that to be an enjoyable experience. So that's just some examples from my personal experience of after many years in service.
And it seems like if people are not open and willing to change and learn new skills, then it's kind of your work kind of becomes pointless, right?
Well, yeah, and especially now because we don't live in a static environment. I mean, we've learned that all too well very recently. But even before, if you go back 2, 3, 4 years, things were already changing, and technology, digitization was arguably one of the largest drivers. But what about globalization? What about how easy it is to get around and to collaborate now? What about the shift of what now we call the boundaryless organization, where it's really collaborations of enterprises working together to produce products and services, as opposed to any one single sole sourced provider. Those days are over. If you even go back to the 80s and you think about Dell and how they revolutionized supply chains and just-in-time assembly, these things have been in motion all the time. And so now nobody's operating in a static environment. So therefore, the ability to process change and to adapt is a critical success factor for people and organizations. Now we're back to basic human psychology again, though. Not everyone processes change the same way. Now you take some jackasses as managers and who are making things worse and making it harder because we haven't taught them the way that the Marines had taught me, right, about leadership and how to drive change. Then all of a sudden it makes everything harder for everyone. And here come those suboptimal results. And now the executives are frustrated because they're saying, I'm trying to make these changes to stay competitive and be dynamic and operate in this fluid environment. And the people are operating, in a worse way. And it's costing me more money from turnover, from frustration, missed deadlines, whatever it might be. And it's just a situation that is, Toby, is imminently avoidable if we use the data that we know about people and their brains and how they're wired, and we think about the context and we use frameworks. We can actually have a fighting chance, as opposed to what we're getting now, which is a subjective approach, managing by gut, and just making a mess of things otherwise.
Matt, can you give me any like specific examples, anything that like stands out to you as far as maybe clients that you've worked with where you've and maybe you could walk me through kind of what you saw with them, and then how your approach to talent optimization came in and actually resulted in changes and improvements in the company.
Yeah, there was a technology company recently that started looking at the behaviors of the preferences and behaviors of their team members. And they had gone in with this subjective understanding of thinking, we've worked together for a long time, right? This is a company based up in Vancouver, and said, we have a good understanding of the people that we have. Went through a process that said, let's measure. So we take all the data and let's understand our people in a more in-depth way. let's start to use the data to start to appreciate one another's strengths, but also to identify our natural blind spots. We've all got them. We've all got potential pitfalls in our personalities that just make it something that, just areas of our game that we're just not as strong at. By surfacing all these things, that led to higher levels of team cohesion for this group. And the CEO finished off this journey, this part of the discovery journey, by saying, what is my strategy I'm trying to pursue? Took a look at it visually with a combination of the strategy priority assessment that I talked about a little bit earlier, as well as the team configuration, and decided we need to reconfigure some of these teams. We've got great players. I love my team, but by emphasizing things a little differently, arranging them slightly differently, we can get a more natural alignment between the skills of my people, their natural tendencies, and what we're asking them to do. So with some slight configuration changes, a little bit of a, hey, can I borrow you for this key initiative? Hey, can you help me out over here? Let's move this around. Let's change this charter. Maybe this priority goes over to this other team. Do we really need to be doing this right now? How do we change some of our hiring? This really unlocked their next level of performance. And the reality, this is the part I love the most. The CEO had described that a pursuit of talent optimization by using this approach produced an exponential return on their time investment. So when you think about in real business terms, these things matter. This isn't about kumbaya and holding hands and feeling great about one another. That's not the entire sum of what we're talking about here. It's how do we actually produce better work and have a better experience along the way. And that is meaningful. And I mean, it just shows up on the bottom line in the form of absenteeism, in turnover, retraining costs, frustration. If you think about a manager and how much time they have to spend in their office fighting fires because group A isn't working well with group B, and it was completely because of those competing goals and competing styles I shared with you earlier, that it creates this drain on the bottom line that is absolutely tangible. And so if we can eliminate a lot of the people parts, the messy parts that we've just chalked up to, well, people are people, they're just variables, it's just how it is. No, it's not just how it is. Stop that. Use data, use a framework. Let's figure out exactly what we're asking these people to do, and let's be proactive about it and get a better business result along the way.
And speaking of data, let's talk about like what are your kind of methods for assessment in terms of when it comes down to like learning about these different people, how everything fits together in an organization. Do you use like self-reported scales or ask people, managers questions about their employees? Like what's your approach there?
Yeah, organizations have a lot of different data they can turn to start to have more of an empirical foundation about people at work. As from my perspective inside of our company, we have an assessment. It's very brief, but it's reliable and valid like any good assessment needs to be. And it really comes down to the top drivers of personality traits and motivating needs at work. So that's basically within the work context, what do we know about people's personality? And there are other inventories like ours that are out there. And I would just encourage any company to use data, right? And be able to have that sort of foundation of really understanding people. Another example might be if you think about it like a 360, another common technique where we start to get feedback from the boss, from coworkers and peers, from direct reports, and from the individual themselves through a self-rating, and start to understand within recent work performance and interactive style, what are we observing? What kind of themes are emerging? What sort of quantitative ratings are we seeing? That type of a 360 assessment result can provide another lens as to almost a reputation or interactive style. I mentioned cognitive ability. There are standard inventories for cognitive ability that are also valid and reliable that can work really well. There's lots of sources of data. I think one of the challenges is that many companies will use a lot of data in the pre-hire process about candidates because they want to make a good selection decision, and that's a great thing to do. But too few of them use the data they gleaned about a candidate after they become an employee. And that, for me personally, is where I really like to see behavioral data and personality data not just be put in the drawer and pretend like we don't know anything more about this person, but really continue its use throughout the employee life cycle. Because now all of a sudden, you think about it gets really complicated in a hurry. So I'll give you an example, Toby. So here's one person. They have natural personality styles and drivers, and you're putting them into their job, one job. Well, very few jobs today are jobs in isolation. Like if you're on a research team, for example, you're on a team. and you're working with other people, and some are going to write, and some are going to collect data, and some are going to run the computer programs, or whatever it might be. Maybe some people are going to do all those things. So the reality is that you're part of a team. Well, how many people are part of just one team? The reality is you might be part of your functional team. Like, let's take a marketing example. I work with other marketers, but then you're going to have a cross-functional team. I'm also partnering with our sales organization as well as, our brand team or whatever. Now all of a sudden it's like, okay, how many teams am I on at one time? And I'm operating within the organizational context of what we're trying to accomplish as a collective whole, and in a dynamic environment where things are changing. So it's like, holy cow, we have to use the data within all of these contexts in a very quick and lightweight and agile way if we're going to understand why somebody's having a bad day at work, or why their performance might be suffering, or why a team is missing its targets. We have to go back to those assessment results, that data foundation, time and again, and start looking at what are the interventions, what can we control in terms of assignments or coaching techniques, or any sort of interactive relational development that we can provide in order to get a better outcome.
Well, Matt, transitioning a little bit, right before we started airing, you mentioned to me that you recently started a podcast. So tell me about kind of what the inspiration behind doing that is, and what kind of the guests that you're hoping to have on, and just kind of what the podcast is about.
Yeah, over the course of my career, I've had an opportunity to participate in a lot of webinars and interviews and all kinds of fun things throughout work, but I never had a podcast of my own. And I got to this point where I started to reflect on, what have I accomplished? I've done a lot of things in my life, but what really drives me? What values do I have? What's my why? It has different types of terms, but basically what energizes me? And as I thought back and I said, well, I've got a lot of things I've done in the area of goal attainment and these kinds of fun things. But really, if I had to think about my life as a career arc and a journey, it really is all about the area of leadership. And you mentioned at the top, I went from being what I call an insecure business manager, because when I first came out of school, I didn't realize how important the human part of work really was. So I was, at the time, I'll date myself, but I was driving back and forth quite a ways, and I had a trunk full of audiobooks, and I was studying anything I could about strategy and the hard aspects of business and modeling and all kinds of great stuff. But I was a lousy manager, because the reality is I was missing that human part, understanding how people are wired, understanding how much of the human aspect shows up in our work, and the interpersonal relational piece. So over time, what I decided after a really devastating, for me personally, an experience where I had to fire a woman who was working for me, and I had decided to hire her. I was the one who brought her in the first place, and she was not a good fit for the role. And it was rough, obviously, for her, but it was also rough for me. And I was like, what happened? How am I studying so hard and working on the technical aspects of business? And that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. You missed over the most important part, the people part. And so I really worked to understand and go back and brush up on psychology and understanding the role of people at work, and really started to bring more of my authentic self to work as best I could. And that's where I started to become a more accomplished and authentic people leader. And for me, that's the journey that I want to help other people take. People don't listen to audiobooks anymore, at least not the same way. We have an explosion of content choices available. And podcasting is something that I listen to a lot. When I'm walking the dog or doing dishes or whatever, I love to have a podcast on. So I said, okay, great. So if things have changed a little bit and I have the opportunity to talk about leadership for aspiring leaders, what do aspiring leaders need? And how do they consume content, and what do they really want most? And that's where I hit on my podcast, which is called Lead the People. And it was all about, how do I stop from managing the business and start leading the people? That's what really made a difference for me in my career and my enjoyment of it and the success I was having at work. That's what I now want to help other aspiring leaders make a similar sort of transition with, hopefully without all the heartache.
Well, Matt, what would you do you have any sort of maybe more kind of simple, like, recommendations or any tips, say, for leaders who are looking to kind of optimize the talent in their organization? Any, say, like, a few things that come to mind?
Yeah, as I started to think about what is my own approach to leadership, how do I think about it? It really boiled down to three important areas. One was self-mastery. If you're not good at what you do, nobody's going to listen. The second is inspiring others. because we have to do our work with and through other people, and we have to find ways to connect with them in a deep way. And the third is all about delivering results. That's why we're here as leaders. Leaders aren't here just to connect with people and have a good time. They're here to make, to move a needle, to put a dent in the universe, right? To put a result on the board. So for me, self-mastery, inspiring others, and delivering results is critically important. The very first step that I would encourage any aspiring leader to take starts with self-awareness. If you don't have self-awareness, you can't find a way to embrace your authentic self. So there are many techniques and tools out there. There's great books out there. There's just so many ways to find out, like, what am I all about? Making time and space to really reflect and do the introspective work. Sometimes it's hard work. Some people are better at it than others, but you really have to understand, like, what is my value system? What do I really value most in terms of my leadership? What is that personality driver for me? How do I really approach this world of work? Why do I do what I do? What do I care about most? And these types of things are really important. So I'd say that the journey towards becoming an accomplished and authentic people leader begins with that self-discovery. That's where I'd begin. After that, it really comes down to a lot of willingness to make yourself uncomfortable, to apply yourself and learn your craft, because it does require study and practice, and you have to get feedback along the way, and to really play the long game. Look for opportunities to practice at work and just do the crap out of it. Basically, it comes down to that.
Awesome. Well, Matt, I really enjoyed having you on the show today. If people want to find out more about your work or connect with you, find out about your podcast, where would you direct them to?
Yeah, most of my work, I'm most active on LinkedIn. So if you want to go LinkedIn with me, and my name is Matt Poepsel again, you can find me there. And again, my podcast, you're welcome to drop in and have a listen. That's Lead the People, available on all the platforms.
Awesome. Any closing thoughts? Anything related to what we've been talking about today when it comes to leadership or talent optimization? Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Only that every leader is on a journey, and regardless of where you are on yours. And I would say that, the term leader sometimes is a little bit intimidating for some, but it shouldn't be. We have leaders at every level for a reason, whether you're an individual contributor, whether you're a first-time manager, or a CEO of a very large company. I think we need leadership now more than ever. And so it's in that spirit that I use the term, but every leader's on a journey. Every leader is a work in progress. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to have a voice. You have to figure out what you're all about. You have to care. And again, if you prioritize the people part and make sure that the people are aligned with the business, the outcome you're trying to produce, things will take care of themselves. If you skip over that people part and you just try to do the technical aspects, it's going to be hollow. It's just not going to work in the long term. So that would be my parting thoughts on that.
Great. Well, for the listeners who did enjoy the show, go ahead and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're Roscoe's Wetsuit. Also, if you guys could go ahead and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, that would be greatly appreciated. You can find audio versions of the podcast available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and just about anywhere else that audio podcasts are available. Matt, again, I wanted to really thank you for coming on the show today and sharing your expertise. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Awesome, Toby. Thanks again for having me.